Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Trauma-Informed Church Kid Podcast. Today and every day, we are reconstructing religion for the hurting with theology that doesn't hurt. Today's episode is a bonus one. This will be a review of the House of David TV series currently streaming on Amazon. This series is one I was both looking forward to and also dreading, given a few realities. I was really looking forward to it because I had heard that Father Stephen DeYoung, one of the co-hosts of the Lord of Spirits podcast, which is a favorite of mine, took on a consulting role to the producers in the lead-up to the series. He has said that some of his recommendations did not make it on screen, which was somewhat concerning, but he also seemed overall to be satisfied with the final product. The other reason I was looking forward to it was because it was being executive produced by Dr. Nathan Jacobs. If you have listened to this podcast for any length of time, you will know that Dr. Jacobs is a favorite of mine and that his work has been immensely helpful, informative for me in reframing how I see the scriptures and understanding the philosophical ideas behind and within the scriptures. Finally, I was looking forward to it because I am a Marvel fan, especially of the Daredevil TV series, first on Netflix and then on Disney+. And the wife of Saul was going to be played by the actress who played Vanessa on that series. Going from the wife of one megalomaniacal king figure to another, I'm in. But then there was the other side. I've consumed faith-based media for my whole life, as a good church kid does. My earliest memories of this are Salty the Singing Songbook and some animated TV series called Superbook and Flying House. Imagine Christian anime with a Lost in Space plotline built around Bible stories. I remember that when I finally got a Game Boy, yes, I am that old, I had 3 games. One was a racing game, the other was a Mario game, and the last one, honestly the one I played the most, was a Bible game. After some internet sleuthing, I remember that it was called Exodus: Journey to the Promised Land. It was a classic Temple Run style game where Moses would shoot out W's from his staff to destroy obstacles on each level. The W stood for the Word of God, obviously. Genuinely, I remember enjoying it quite a lot. There was also all the other faith-based media I devoured quite a lot of as a kid. McGee and Me, Adventures in Odyssey, Wow cassettes, Touched by an Angel, the Buttercream Gang, and a whole bunch of other wholesome and or family-friendly media. Quite literally, my first R-rated movie I ever owned was a 2-volume VHS of the original Matrix movie. My first album was a DC Talk cassette, free at last if you want to know. I can still recite whole sections of the BBC Narnia Chronicles movie with animatronic Aslan by heart. And of course, no description of late 90s, early 2000s Christian media is complete without mentioning VeggieTales. I was in high school before that really hit, but I still remember it fondly. Of course, not all my memories of faith-based media are so fond. I remember very amateur stage productions of Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames in local churches, the horrendous Left Behind movies and books, though I didn't know better then, and of course the late great Planet Earth and A Thief in the Night, as well as the Omega Code and other rapture-related or so-called end times movies. These media were very much a mixed bag for me. Some I enjoyed quite a bit as a young kid, but then learned more about quality media and enjoyed less and less. Some I liked then and still like now. Some I was uncomfortable with them, but thought it was somehow wrong or unfaithful to not like them, and so I stayed quiet. And of course, the proliferation of faith-based media has only increased since then. These run the gamut from the genuinely enjoyable, The Robe, The Prince of Egypt, The Chosen, Amazing Grace, to the I'm glad I saw it once, but probably never again, The Passion of the Christ, To End All Wars, Hacksaw Ridge, to the meh classics, The Ten Commandments, Chariots of Fire, The Greatest Story Ever Told, Jesus of Nazareth, etc. And all the way down to the truly cringe-inducing and eye-rolling. These last ones I will not list. partly because that list is very, very long, and I want to keep this under 30 minutes, and partly because I don't like taking a dump on people's experience of faith. I'm not here to bash on people who have genuinely found delight and heartwarming experiences and meaningful comfort from faith-based media. And I certainly don't want to take a snobbishly superior tone with things that are near and dear to their hearts. But honestly, I have a deeply woven, visceral prejudice against faith-based media. Some of that is the mixed bag heritage of my childhood. Some of that is the painful writing and acting and production values of far too many faith-based productions. And some of that is the jaded cash grab of it all that has only become more obvious with time. Some of that is the helpless frustration that comes from seeing only two portrayals, either A, Hollywood caricatures of faith-based people, or B, faith-based saccharine tripe from actual Christians. And, to lay my cards on the table, I am deeply grossed out and bordering on enraged by the recent overlap of so-called Christian media and political ideology. I am looking at you, anything with Dinesh D'Souza's fingerprints on it. So all this by way of long introduction. I am deeply skeptical, highly reactionary, probably more than a bit jaded, and buried somewhere deep down, masochistically hopeful about anything that is labeled as faith-based media. I am happy to say that the House of David TV series was a very good success in that regard, even with those biases. I will go ahead and give a review in broad strokes today, and I will attempt to not be super specific, except when necessary. But honestly, the story doesn't really deviate much at all from the biblical story, so there is little that will be a genuine surprise. However, there might be a mild spoiler alert worth mentioning if you aren't as familiar with the biblical narrative as someone like me. And it is worth noting that the series does supplement the biblical narrative with several details from extra-biblical traditions. Your mileage may vary on that score. Some people will find that unacceptable and say, the Bible is good enough for me, and will go home and watch God's Not Dead 6, The Undeadening, blissfully unaware of the irony of that reaction. Some people will find the conflation and mixing of human tradition and biblical narrative uncomfortable, and while I understand that, I would be curious how they would handle the references to Azazel, or the Book of Enoch, or Wisdom of Solomon, or Sirach in sacred scripture. In any case, my situation is that I am fine with all of it. I love the exposures to extra-biblical traditions. I find that it both fleshes out the otherwise laconic narrative well, and it adds intriguing character dimensions. So that was not a barrier for me. I found the characters very compelling, even with my knowledge of the narrative, and I engaged with the stories on a very personal level, not just on the level of faith. A few standouts to highlight. Jonathan was a true joy to watch. I am really intrigued and excited to see how they play the friendship between David and Jonathan blossoming in later seasons. The actor, Ethan Kai, played him with an appropriate amount of delicacy, torn between loyalty to Adonai and loyalty to his family, as well as considerations of dynastic heritage and reputation, all played in to create a very complex and nuanced character that was portrayed very well. I had some quibbles with the characters of Saul and his wife Ahinoam, more on that later, but the actors who portrayed them, Ali Suleiman and Ayelet Zurer, did wonders with everything they were given. I love both the humanity and the desperation behind Saul's character, and I found myself riveted to the screen every time his wife was a part of the action. I don't know how Ms. Zurer does it, but every word that comes out of her mouth seems to carry tones and overtones and undertones and subtleties that I simply could not look away from. It's a lot to enjoy. The character of Samuel, Stephen Lang, was a true revelation. I've never paid much attention to him in the David story, seeing him as more window dressing for the real story. This opened my eyes to the entire story of Samuel, how he was Israel's judge, and how as a prophet of the Most High he is given both deference, fear, and suspicion. What really hit home for me was how doing the will of Adonai was so upending and unsettling for his entire life. He couldn't be a prophet as a side gig in any way. His entire being was devoted wholly to service to Adonai, and that demanded all of him. Everything else had to fit in to that calling. This is something I need to ponder on and consider more carefully how that needs to play out for my own life. But I was something like convicted in watching Samuel. It is always a good thing when art can move you, and it's been a while since faith-based art has done that. Speaking of moving you, I was somewhat conflicted about David and Michal's relationship. I felt like the actors did what they could with what they were given, nothing too cringy or celebration worthy, and I sincerely appreciated that they slow-walked the relationship. In my opinion, they took their time and grappled with the realities of the culture and the situation, rather than just saying, they get together because the Bible says so. I do think there were a few moments that felt strained and somewhat artificial, but it's hard for me to tell if that feeling is because of the aforementioned negative bias and jadedness, or if that was really part of the execution. I think it might be the latter, but I won't fault them for it. David the character is perfectly serviceable, which if it sounds like I'm damning with faint praise, then you might be hearing me correctly. He has an absolutely gorgeous voice. He sings all the psalms that are performed in the series, and he conveys adequate pathos at the appropriate moments. But when I think of the figure of David in the Bible, he is larger than life. He is a figure that is brash, something like fearless, somewhat arrogant, and above all else, a warrior. The TV series, in my opinion, did a lot of telling and not enough showing of David's fiery and passionate character. They talked a lot about how his mother was like that, and that David has supposedly inherited that, but honestly, I saw more of a downcast, demure, tentative, and trembling shepherd boy than I saw the future messianic king of Israel. I know some of this can be attributed to his struggle to overcome his questionable heritage and his ostracization from the family as a result. But I think that it really got brought into sharp relief for me when he faced Goliath in the final episode. His speech to King Saul and the Israelites was impassioned, bold, and brazen, and I found myself wondering where and when he found his cojones. I just didn't see enough of that prior to make it feel as organic and earned as I wanted it to. Michal is a character that I really wanted to like more. After all, one of my best friends is named after her. She had some sparkling and shining moments for sure. She is at her most intriguing when she is playing the mediator, the go-between who seems to be the one who can make everyone happy and get anything done, no matter how far apart they may seem at first. This is obviously a dynamic that is ripe for unhealthy outcomes, and while I wish the show would have explored those in a bit more depth, it does just fine with showing the weight of that people-pleasing behavior on Michal. She is genuinely good at it, and it shows just how resourceful and clever she can be, a skill she gets to put to use in one of the latter episodes. I think that in some ways her character may have suffered from being put next to her sister, Mirab, too often. Mirab is a character who causes chaos almost just for fun, and or to poke her family in the eyes, feeling aggrieved and left out because she thinks that she is in the shadow of her perfect people-pleasing sister. While that is a very relatable motivation and creates a very sharp dynamic between the two, honestly, Mirab often winds up getting the better of the two when they are in scenes together. I also don't think that making Michal the voiceover narrator helped in my eyes. I'm just not a fan of voiceover narration usually, Cate Blanchett being the clear and unquestionable exception. So she gets a few points off in my eyes just for that alone. But she is still engaging, interesting, and I can see why David is captivated by her. That character is one that I hope we will see develop a sharper and more edged personality than the soft and pliant yet sympathetic character that we now have. I just can't see the eventual confrontation between David and Michal, where he dances near naked in the streets and she sneers at him for it, coming organically out of the two characters we have so far. A few side characters worth mentioning. I really like that they brought in the Witch of Endor at this stage, showing the kind of spiritual warfare of this period in Israel's history. I also found the character of Doeg the Edomite a fascinating watch and a compellingly villainous person. He isn't twirling his mustache while he does dastardly deeds. He just does them, almost flippantly and with zero empathy for his victims. That actually makes him more frightening, that he doesn't even seem to understand the hurt he causes. I'll be curious to see where that goes, as he plays a role later on in the David narrative. I was mixed on the portrayal of Agag, the king of the Amalekites. He shows up in the first episode, and then later as the kind of mental derangement of Saul, haunting him in his dreams and waking visions. I have always found this trope of one character can see somebody that no one else can to be a bit hokey, and it feels too much like telling rather than showing. It also seems to take some of the agency away from Saul in his downfall. I don't think that the series made him a victim per se, but it did put its thumb just a bit too much on the supernaturally cursed scale for my taste. However, I did appreciate the portrayal of the Amalekites as cannibalistic demon worshippers. I do think that is probably necessary and, insofar as we have any evidence of this, probably accurate. So I found that to be a reasonable portrayal. A side character who was very well done was Eliab, Jesse's eldest son. His grudging and almost half-ashamed love for his younger brother was really sweet to watch. I could tell that he would, and very well might at some point, die for David. But it was equally clear that he wanted no one to know that, perhaps including himself. There was one moment where this possibility was put to the test, and while he survives through what can only be described as plot armor, I don't think that can last forever. This is another dimension of the series that shows great character promise, and I can't wait to see what they do with it. The Philistine king Achish was another one that was intriguing. The character himself is pretty much a cipher, not much there. But the politics of the enemy forces and how they viewed the Israelites and their God in relation to themselves and their gods was a really interesting bit of plot. It really made a lot of sense of why they tried to seek out these fearsome giants for help, and it made for a bit of intrigue behind the scenes. There is a small subplot involving Michal and Merab's brother Eshbal, which did very little for me. It felt too contrived and on the nose from start to finish. I found none of that compelling TV. The introduction of David's mother as a character in flashbacks and an exposition dump in one of the latter episodes felt a little bit like a missed opportunity for me. I wanted to know more about her and to see her in action more often. I was fine with the eventual explanation for David's suspect birth, but it felt a bit like a fridging moment to me when she died. For those of you who don't know, this is a term for when a female character is killed, only to serve the development and growth of the main male character. I don't know that there was much space in what they had allotted to go over any more of her, but I would have liked to see it. Now, about Goliath. Some spoilers here that are not specific to the biblical text, by the way. Be ye warned, ye who enter here. Listeners to this podcast will know that I am on board with the supernatural dimension to the genesis of the giants, and this was handled very well in the series, in my opinion. I liked how they kind of humanized Goliath, but without showing him having an orc baby, looking at you, Rings of Power. There was a curious ambiguity in the story which his mother Orpah told about his parentage, which seems like it could fit either the ritual participation thesis I've advanced or the angelic procreation thesis some others have advocated for. This ambiguity seems to fit the biblical data, so far as I can tell. One issue that stuck out to me pretty sharply. In describing the parentage of the Nephilim and eventually their descendants such as Goliath, the filmmakers chose to depict the story being told, via voiceover, through the usage of AI-generated scenes. I get that budgets are tight, and while I applaud the financial creativity to an extent, I sharply denounce the use of AI in this way. Not only am I just not an AI advocate in general, apart from as a research aid, I think there are some real ethical considerations in regard to human artists that are blithely overlooked when we use AI to generate images which make money for us. When artificial learning models develop their, quote, style by essentially copying some unknown conglomerate of real artist style, I get the intellectual property icks. I was not happy with that inclusion in the series. Even apart from that, it was jarringly different in visual tone and style from everything else in the series, so it stuck out like a sore thumb. A few other qualms about Goliath. I didn't like the intrusive thump of his footsteps that seemed to be far too much, and my home stereo isn't really all that heavy on the bass for whatever it's worth. He is a giant, yes, but this seemed overdone to me. In contrast, I thought that his taunting of the Israelite army was underdone. In the Bible, he spouts blasphemies and obscenities. I think that the French army in Monty Python and the search for the Holy Grail might have been a bit more insulting than Goliath was. I'll give him this. I never heard the sentence, "I defy," end in so many different ways. We get it, bro. You defy Adonai, Israel, Saul, and a bunch more. I know that you're more brawn than brains, but come on. All of this kind of led to a feeling of a bit of a letdown for me in the final battle. I still haven't decided if that's just because the story and the narrative is so well worn that nothing can make it come alive again, or if this was a story and writer problem. One very positive note I will give that scene. It actually showed David cutting off Goliath's head. Honestly, it's not very often that this coda to the story is shown or discussed, but I think it is absolutely crucial to hyperlinking back to the serpent stomper of Genesis 3. In the narrative of 1 Samuel, or 1 Kingdoms for our Orthodox brethren, Goliath is presented as having a ton of allusions back to the spiritual being known as the Nakash, from the scales on his armor to the bronze references to his origin, both as a Gathite and as a descendant of the Nephilim. There is so much there. I was very much against the Chosen TV series leaving out the Transfiguration, and I'm very much in favor of showing the Anointed One decapitating the spiritual offspring of the serpent. Sometimes the little things matter quite a lot. The moment where David got cut by the edge of the spear blade, which bookends the entire series, felt too much like the moment in The Two Towers when Aragorn fell off the cliff after the warg battle. It was an unnecessary and unsuccessful attempt at drama and raising the stakes. We know Aragorn doesn't die. We know David kills Goliath. Just lean into it. And speaking of Lord of the Rings parallels, boy, there were several in this series, and a few Dune ones as well. This is not necessarily a criticism. Every fantasy series out there pilfers from the best. So, as far as I'm concerned, go right ahead. Just don't do it in a way where when King Saul says, "Who am I?" to his lieutenant while suiting up for battle, I kept expecting Abner to say, "You are a king, sire," and him to reply with, "And do you trust your king?" Or when Jonathan meets up with a young warrior and he swings his sword around testing it out, I won't find myself mouthing, "There is always hope." Jonathan even says, "This is a good sword." So this is more than just conceptual parallels in my brain. I could go on. Saul has a ring-wraith vision while haunted by Agag. Jonathan bursts through the door like Aragorn into Edoras. The Jonathan, Saul, and Faramir Denethor parallels, etc. Or how every time a character in the series started reciting, "Fear is the enemy, fear is the thief," I almost chimed in with, "Fear is the mind killer." I think you get the picture. This isn't particularly a thumbs down, though I wouldn't call it a thumbs up either. This is something I would call a flag on the field. It's not quite risen to the level of playing dirty, but it's also not the kind of play you want to see or which follows the rules of filmmaking. 10-yard penalty, repeat first down, and don't do it again. Having said everything good I've said so far, I do definitely have some pointed criticisms for the show. I thought that Ahinoam went to sorcery and blood drinking as a solution for Saul's malady way too early and too easily. I mentioned the side plot with Eshbal already, which was a bust. I noticed as well that Saul only had one wife that we can see, rather than the harem he had in the Bible. And since David will eventually, shall we say, fill out the royal bedchambers himself, I am uncertain and not particularly hopeful for where they will take this in later seasons. I'm not asking for a Littlefinger style scene where exposition dump happens with full-on gratuitous nudity, but with all the other attention paid to historical and biblical accuracy, this one stood out. Although there was one bit that felt like a historical inaccuracy for me, but I don't have enough archaeological knowledge to say for sure. This world felt too built up and established for where I think it actually falls in the narrative of history. To my understanding, this happened just after the Bronze Age collapse, when most of the major civilizations of the world fell into ruin. We even see this in the book of Judges, which is chronologically immediately prior, where the clear sense for Israel is of a scattered group of tribespeople who are loosely held together by a confederation built around a rotating cast of judges. There is also very little sense that the people knew much about or had any lasting record of the Torah of Moses. And yet, we find a fully built, walled enclosed cities with scriptoriums filled with Torah scrolls, including one about the book of Judges. King Saul has a full throne room, a complete royal court, and all the other trappings of a fully established monarchy. I simply don't know for sure if this is likely for the first king of Israel immediately following regional total chaos. It sounds a little bit like the setting should look a little bit more post-apocalyptic Mad Max rather than Game of Thrones. There is a scene where Jonathan tries a night raid or assassination on Goliath that felt too convenient by half for me. For one, as with the faux scare about David lying bloodied on the battlefield, we know it won't last. For two, it seems like too contrived of a reason for why David, and not Jonathan, steps up to fight Goliath. Finally, King Achish lets him go for no reason I can tell, and in a way that is far out of character for an early Iron Age chieftain. I just wasn't a fan. All in all, these are overall smallish gripes in an otherwise very engaging and competently dealt with story. The production values are very solid. The faith-based dimensions are present but not heavy-handed. The historical and biblical accuracy seems to be within the scope of reasonability, and the creative licenses which are taken appear to, by and large, have clear justification and serve characterization more than plot. All in all, I'm very pleased and pleasantly surprised by the fidelity, entertainment value, and promise of House of David. If you have Amazon Prime, it is well worth your time. I would heartily recommend it to anyone over the age of 10. I hope this is the next step in the growth and maturity of faith-based media. Season 1 has given me a lot to hope for. And that's where I'll leave you today. On YouTube and X, you can find me at Church Kid Pod, and on Facebook, you can join the discussion in our discussion group, Trauma Informed Church Kids. This podcast is hosted through Podbean, so you can find the HQ for all podcast content on churchkidpod.podbean.com. There you will find links to all the major podcast apps you can find me at, as well as notices and other important information. I know that every podcast asks you to do this, but it's especially important as we get started and get the word out there. Please take a minute to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred platform so that you never miss an episode. But also, and more importantly, if you love the content or find it valuable, please give it a 5-star rating. That is really the only way that the algorithms will give me any respect. And without those sweet, sweet 5-star ratings, no one will be able to find this content. If you think I haven't earned a 5-star rating, feel free to message me on social media at ChurchKidPod, and I will see what I can do. I'm always happy to get good, constructive feedback and to improve wherever I can. No matter what your story is, no matter where you come from or where you are, I want to pray for you from the words of St. Paul to the Ephesians, chapter 3, verse 19. I ask God that you may know the love of Christ, which is more than we can ever know. I ask that you may be filled with everything that God has. See you next time.